Let's take a look at what actually happened in the 2000 presidential election. This ties into what's happening in the 2024 election because it's a three-way race. I believe that the independent candidate in the 2000 election, James Song, was the actual winner, and I also believe Ko Wen-je, the so-called independent or TPP candidate in the 2024 election right now, is the actual leader. So here are the official results. Chen Shui-bian with 39.3%, James Song with 36.84%, Lian Zhan with 23.1%, a fairly normal and valid ballot rate of 0.96%, and a high turnout of 82.69%. The opinion poll I'm about to show comes from the TVBS magazine September 11th to September 17th, 1999. Somewhere before the election, the media always gives you the approximate results so that you'll believe it on election day. This is the publicized opinion poll for TVBS the last 3 days of the election. On the top line in white, we have Lian Zhan. The next line in green, we have Chen Shui-bian. And on the third line in red, we have James Song. We can see that in all 3 days, Lian Zhan appears to be leading the race. However, this turned out to be completely untrue. He was actually a distant third place. This was done to mislead the pan-blue voters into voting for Lian and not Song, which we see in third place. Therefore, you can see that the government's strategy is to release media opinion polls that put the actual leader in third place instead of first place. This is a My Formosa poll of the 2024 election. We can see Ko Wen-je is in a distant third place with only 18%. My Formosa is believed by Western observers and DPP supporters as being the most accurate opinion poll center in Taiwan. Since the vice presidential candidates have been announced, they want us to believe that Zhao Shaokang has helped the KMT ticket to a 31% support rate. However, Hou Yu-yi has improved little on social media since that announcement has been made. Meanwhile, Ko Wen-je has continued to trend the best on social media, but its support rate in opinion polls has dropped to 18%. Based upon the government's strategy of putting the leader in third place, we can interpret that Ko Wen-je is actually leading this race. This opinion poll and all others in Taiwan that show Ko in third place are completely fake. Let's take a look at Dr. Gao Zemin's book on the 2000 election fraud, endorsed by James Song's wife, Chen Wanshui. This is a summary of the voting stations 574 to 593 in Kaohsiung County's Hualien Township. We can see that the F column, which is the blank or remaining ballots, are completely blank. This is possibly due to the fact that these ballots could not be verified because there was ballot stuffing going on in this election. Now, what gives away what happened in this election was that the number 2 candidate, Lian Zhan, often had more ballots than the number 1 candidate, James Song. This should probably never happen, or should hardly ever happen in this election, due to the fact that James Song has about 13% more than Lian Zhan overall in the election. They're both pan-blue candidates, so Song should be leading Lian in deep blue stations as well as deep green stations, and everything else in between. But yet we can see that candidate number 2, Lian Zhan, has more ballots than candidate number 1, James Song, in several of these voting stations, suggesting that James Song's ballots have been stolen and Chen Shui-bian and or Lian Zhan ballots have been stuffed in their place. So a normal distribution of ballots in pan-green stations should be Chen Shui-bian first, James Song second, Lian Zhan third. In normal pan-blue stations, we should see James Song first, Chen Shui-bian second, and Lian Zhan third. We can also see in some deep blue mainlander village stations, James Song 1, Lian Zhan 2, and Chen Shui-bian third. But what we should not see, or hardly ever see, are stations where Lian is 1, Song is 2, Chen is 3, or Lian is 1, Chen is 2, Song is 3, or Chen is 1, Lian is 2, and Song is 3. In short, any voting station where Lian is leading Song, the distribution of the ballots is irregular and therefore probably manipulated. The values for the following XY graphs come from the official data from the Central Election Commission, which you can download at www.cec.gov.tw. It comes in an Excel file. So each of the following graphs is for a city or county in the 2000 election. Each point represents a voting station. The x-axis is James Song's ballots minus Lian Zhan's ballots in that station. The y-axis is Chen Shui-bian's ballots minus James Song's ballots. A strong negative correlation suggests James Song's ballots are being stolen and Chen Shui-bian's ballots are being stuffed. So this is the graph for Taipei City. The x-axis is James Song's ballots minus Lian Zhan's ballots at a particular voting station, and the y-axis is Chen Shui-bian's ballots minus James Song's ballots. We can see that there's a clear negative correlation here. The circled voting stations, or the dots, are the most suspicious voting stations. Anytime James Song's ballots minus Lian Zhan's ballots get to 100 or less, it's probably suspicious, unless the voting station is very small in terms of the number of voters. Now, as the value of the x-axis gets smaller, the value of the y-axis gets larger. This suggests that there is a swapping operation going on. That is, when James Song's ballots are being stolen, Chen Shui-bian's ballots are being stuffed in their place. Keep in mind that the city mayor was Ma Ying-jeou from the KMT party. Therefore, there is no correlation between who the city mayor is and which party they're from, and whether or not election fraud took place. Here's a list of voting stations from Beitou, Shilin, and Zhongshan district where Lian Zhan has more ballots than James Song. These are clearly voting stations where James Song's ballots have been stolen, and Lian Zhan and or Chen Shui-bian's ballots have been stuffed in their place. James Song should never be in third place behind Lian Zhan in this election in any voting station. Here's more voting stations from Datong, Wanhua, and Wenshan district. James Song also has less ballots than Lian Zhan in all of these stations, sometimes by over 100. Here's a list of what I call normal pan-grain voting stations in Beitou, Shilin, Zhongshan, Datong, and Songshan district. We can see that Chen Shui-bian has the most ballots in each station. James Song is second, and Lian Zhan is in third. This is what I would call a normal distribution of the ballots from the three candidates, where Chen Shui-bian is leading. Here's a list of deep blue voting stations in Shilin, Zhongshan, Xinyi, and Songshan district. We can see that James Song is far ahead in first place. Sometimes Lian is second, and sometimes Chen Shui-bian is second. Both are possible. The point is that in deep blue voting stations, James Song has far more ballots than Lian Zhan. James Song also had far more ballots than Lian Zhan in normal pan-grain voting stations, as I just showed. Here are more deep blue voting stations from Nangang, Neihu, Da'an, Zhongzhen, Wenshan, and Wanhua district, where Song has far more ballots than Lian, whether Lian is in second or third. Here's the graph for Taipei County. We can see that there are even more voting stations on the x-axis that are 100 or less. Therefore, the ballot theft against James Song was even greater in Taipei County than Taipei City. Here are voting stations in Danshui, where so many ballots have been stuffed for Lian Zhan that he's leading in all of the voting stations listed here. It's almost as if he won the election. Here are more voting stations in Sanzi, Jinshan, and Wanli, where Lian Zhan is leading in all of the voting stations listed here. In these voting stations, we can interpret that James Song's ballots have been stolen and replaced with Lian Zhan's ballots mostly. Here are more voting stations in Luzhou, Sulin, Danshui, and Wugu, where Lian Zhan has more ballots than James Song. Here's the graph for Hualien City. We can see several voting stations where the x-axis is less than 100. We can see in Yunlin County that there are far more voting stations where the x-axis is less than 100. The following voting stations in Yunlin City, Luodong, Zhuangwei, Dongshan, and Wujie all have more ballots for Lian Zhan than James Song. This is the graph for Hsinchu City. We can see that there are this many voting stations where the x-axis is less than 100. Here's a list of voting stations in the East District, North District, and the Shangshan District, where Lian Zhan has more ballots than James Song. In voting station 119, Lian Zhan has more than 100 ballots than James Song. This is very unlikely. Hsinchu County also has a handful of voting stations where the x-axis is less than 100. In Zhubei City, Lian Zhan has more ballots than James Song. In Taoyuan County, we see a heavy concentration of voting stations where the x-axis is less than 100. There are also 3 voting stations down here which indicate that James Song's ballots have been stolen but replaced by Lian Zhan's ballots mostly, and not Chen Shui-bian. Here's a list of voting stations in Taoyuan City and Luzhu Township where Lian has more ballots than James Song. Here are more voting stations in Dayuan, Daxi, Zhongli, Pingzhen, Xinwu, and Guanyin, where Lian Zan has more ballots than James Song. This is the graph for Hualien County, which also has a chunk of voting stations where the x-axis is less than 100. Here are voting stations in Yunlin, Zhunan, Hualong, and Zuolan, which have more ballots for Lian than Song. In Taitung City, we can see this chunk of voting stations where the x-axis is less than 100. Here are voting stations in Central, East, West, and North District where Lian has more ballots than Song. Starting in Taitung County, we can see a greater concentration of voting stations where the x-axis is less than 100. Here are voting stations in Fengyuan, Dongsi, Dajia, and Qingshui where Lian has more ballots than Song. In voting stations 192 and 220, we can see that Lian is leading Song by quite a bit, by over 100 ballots, especially voting station 220, where Lian is leading Song by over 200 ballots. In all of these voting stations in Taitung County, Lian is also leading Song. In Da'an and Longjing, Lian is also leading Song, especially in voting stations 476, 477, and 478. So this is Changhua County, where you can start seeing some truly absurd numbers. I would say that around half of the voting stations definitely have fraud in them, stealing and stuffing. So here we have voting stations from Changhua City to Shihu, where you see Lian has more ballots than Song. And here's more. Voting station 629 in Shizhou is another standout. Lian has 155 more ballots than Song in this station somehow. Here's Erling and Fengyuan. We can see that several voting stations in Erling, Lian has over 100 more ballots than Song. And here's more voting stations from Fengyuan to Zhutang. In voting station 778, Lian has 211 ballots, Song 26, Chen 16. This is an absolute impossibility. There is no way Lian could have 211 ballots and Song only 26. This is the most obvious case of ballot theft against Song and ballot stuffing for Lian in the election. So in Yunlin County, we can see that the vast majority of the stations on the x-axis are less than 100. So the voting stations here that stand out the most are voting station 29 and 152. Lian has more than 200 ballots than Song in both of these stations. In this group of voting stations, voting station 415 stands out. Lian has 241 ballots, while Song only has 67. So Nantou also has a few voting stations where the x-axis is less than 100. Over here, we see one voting station where it's negative 300 or more. This is a voting station where James Song's ballots were stolen and Lian Zan's ballots were stuffed, because we can see that it's 0 on the y-axis. That voting station was in Puli, voting station 109. Lian 530, Song 219. This is the most ridiculous voting station in Nantou County. Chiayi City also has many voting stations where the x-axis is less than 100. I'd say most of them. Here are some voting stations in the East District where Lian has more than Song. And here are some voting stations in the West District where Lian has more than Song. In Chiayi County, we can see that they really went after James Song's ballots. Many voting stations on the x-axis are more than negative 100. We can see a handful that are negative 100 that go to negative 200. Here we see voting stations 3 and 4 in Taiwan City that are particularly heavy. Lian has well over 100 ballots more than Song in both of those stations. Station 256 and Station 260 also stand out. Voting Station 266 is also rather unbelievable. Chen 169, Lian 169, and Song 38. And here are 4 more stations where Lian has a significant number of ballots more than Song. Tainan City, well, this is a pretty bad one. Over half of the stations have more ballots for Lian than Song. Here are several voting stations in the South and West District where Lian has over 100 ballots more than Song. With this kind of distribution, James Song should have come in 3rd place. Here are stations in the North, Central, and Annan District. I put a star next to voting station 382 because Lian has 422 and Song has 152. 382 is very much an anomaly because in other voting stations next to it, Chen Shui-bian is winning in all of them. But why is there this one station where Lian is leading Chen and Song? It's very strange. The one after it, voting station 384, has Lian 404, Song 183. So here's a graph for Tainan County. Tainan County wins the gold medal for the heaviest amount of election fraud and the highest percentage of voting stations where cheating is occurring. I'd say that over 90% of Tainan County's voting stations have theft against James Song and stuffing for either Chen and or Lian. There's just a handful of stations on the right-hand side that look kind of normal. So here are some voting stations in Xingyin, Yanshui, and Baihe. In voting station 116, we have Lian Zan 444, James Song 117. In voting station 118, we have Lian 440, Song 87. This is a rather bold amount of election fraud. Voting station 163 also stands out. Here are some voting stations in Madou. Here are voting stations in Xiayin. Voting station 212 stands out. Here are more voting stations. Voting station 244 is a standout. Here are voting stations in Jiali, a total nightmare from top to bottom. Here are more voting stations in Xuejia. Here are more voting stations in Xuejia and Xigang. Here are voting stations in Qigu. Voting stations 373, 375, 378, and 391 all have Lian leading. Voting station 378 in particular is bad. Lian 161, Chen 133, Song 36. Here are stations in Zhangjing and Beimen. Voting stations 429, 431, and 432 all have Lian leading the voting station, with Song in a distant third place. Here are more voting stations in Beimen, Changhua, and Sanhua. Voting station 475 and voting station 498 stand out the most. In these voting stations, voting station 509 and 531 stand out the most. In these remaining voting stations, voting station 636 stands out the most. Lian 371, Song 173. Kaohsiung City is also pretty heavy. Around half of the stations have more ballots for Lian than Song. In these voting stations, voting station 217 and 219 stand out a bit more. These are voting stations from Sanmin District. Voting station 348 is the standout here. Lian 400, Song 239. Here are more voting stations from Sanmin District. Voting station 371 looks the worst. These are voting stations from Xinqing and Linhya District. All of them look pretty bad. These are voting stations from Xiaogang District. The voting stations from 744 to 747 are the worst, especially 745. That has Lian at 522 and Song at 292. Kaohsiung County is about the same as the city. Approximately half of the voting stations have more ballots for Lian than Song. Out of this list of voting stations, the worst one's probably voting station 447 in Gansan District, with Lian at 360 and Song at 210. In this list of voting stations, we see voting station 583 from Hualien Township, which has Lian at 364 and Song at 173. This is where part of the research for the 2000 book on election fraud was done. Someone in that area said that this election is very strange, because when asking around, he said that 70% of the people in that area were voting for Song, but we can see that the results don't reflect that. Song ended up in a distant third. These voting stations in Luzhu Township saw very heavy election fraud. Voting station 599 and voting station 626 are the standouts. In these voting stations, 677 and 691 are the standouts. Pingtung County is one of the heaviest and most concentrated counties for election fraud. I'd say about 80% of the voting stations in this county have fraud in them. These are voting stations in Pingtung City and Caozhou. Voting station 125 and 141 are the standouts. Here are voting stations from Donggang and Wandan. Voting stations 170, 211, 212, 214, 219, and 231 all have pretty serious election fraud. Wandan Township has 33 voting stations. In all voting stations, Lian had more ballots than Song. The average number per station of Lian ballots over Song was 159. The election staff got so greedy stealing James Song's ballots that it is probably the heaviest amount of election fraud per station in all of Taiwan. I estimate around 300 to 400 ballots were stolen from Song in each voting station. In these voting stations, 249 and 261 were the standouts. In 249, Lian has 312, Song 159. In 261, Lian has 329, Song 166. In these voting stations in Yanpu and Gaosu, voting station 302 is the standout. Lian has 702, Song 361. In Neipu Township, voting station 379 had pretty serious election fraud. Lian had 498, Song 282, Chen 16. This is obviously a deep blue mainlander village. However, they are trying to sell that the voters mostly vote for Lian here, but we know that the distribution is not like this. In these voting stations, 432 and 458 are the standouts. In 432, Lian has 415, Song 198. In 458, Lian has 557, Song 300. These are voting stations from Linbian and Jiadong. In voting station 469, Lian has 403, Song 174. In voting station 474, Lian has 450, Song 189. In voting station 475, Lian has 493, Song 170. In voting station 491, Lian has 421, Song 210. In Taitung County, there's just a few voting stations where Lian has more ballots than Song. Voting station 104 stands out. Lian has 441, Song only 225. Voting station 193 is also interesting. Lian has 24, Chen 23, Song 7. We can see that in a voting station with such few voters, they still move the ballots around so that Lian would have a lot more ballots than Song. Hualien County has 3 voting stations where Lian has more ballots than Song. However, one has 500 more for Lian, so let's take a look at that. In Hualien City, in voting station 6, Lian has 378, Song 210. The interesting thing about voting station 6 is that in 5 and 7, we can also see that these are deep blue voting stations. However, in voting station 5, Song has 584, Lian has 122, and in voting station 7, Song has 592, Lian 58. These people are neighbors living in the same area, Minyi Li. There is no way that the people voting in voting stations 5 and 7 vote in favor of Song by a large margin, but in 6, the voters vote for Lian. This is one of the clearest cases of election fraud in the 2000 election because these people are literally neighbors. In Yunlin and Taichung Li, in voting station 219, Song had 581, Lian 215. However, in the next voting station, 220, Lian had 567, Song 68. In voting station 221, Song had 626, and Lian had 160. However, in voting station 222, Lian had 231, Song 36. So obviously what happened is that in voting station 220 and 222, they swapped the ballots for Song and Lian. That is, they stole a bunch of ballots from Song and they added a bunch of ballots for Lian. It's unclear how much the number was. Once again, these people are all in the same area, they're neighbors. They couldn't possibly vote one way in one voting station and then another way in another voting station. They're obviously targeting deep blue mainlander stations or aboriginal villages to swap Song's ballots for Lian's. Since they can't put Chen Shui-bian's ballots in a deep blue voting station, they just put Lian's in there instead. It's not ballot stuffing for Chen, but at least it's ballot theft against Song. Here's a graph for Pingtung County. We can see that there are a number of stations where Lian has more ballots than Song. Here are 3 standout voting stations. I'd say that voting station 101 stands out the most. Lian has 85, Song has only 10. Here are the graphs for Jimen and Lianjiang County. There's not much going on in these 2 counties. Let's take a look at the testimonial of these 2 observers in a voting station in Taipei City.
他是这样，主要是因为本来我是听到本来说应该唱票应该是就是说他每一张应该是对啊，应该是因为为了谨慎起见，应该每一张都要给我们这些人看嘛。他说不是这样子啊，他就是从票柜拿票起来一个人，然后交给一个工读生一个人，然后大用的，然后他就直接念票了，几号1号，然后那个人就在那边记，然后有时候他都听，有时候还中间还停顿了好几次，就是因为听没清楚。 然后就是那个念好的人他就交给另外一个，然后那个直接放在下面，根本就没有说那个大学公司根本没有说这样子亮票给我们看，就是每一张应该其实都应该不用亮票，就是这样跟摊开给我们看，
就是变成说只有一个人看到就对了，
只有他一个看到，
一个男的，我还认得他，高高的，他是他们选务人员，然后就是记证，然后有时候不是记完一整排，对不对？他就会把它撕下来，然后再做个记号。有这样大家看不懂啊，然后最后他们就主要这都没有什么问题，后来就是忽然之间，后来他不是记完之后，什么票数不对，对，我们当然就因为我们觉得他们鬼鬼祟祟的，因为忙成一团这样，然后弄得乱七八糟，那个票是乱放，那几个人就在那7、8个哈，在那在忙死。他们这样说，他要给我们，他看我们反应很激烈，就交代说，就给我们一个交代说，那我们重算，他们就这样一张要这样算，那你这样我怎么知道你到底是多少张？
还不知道是不是我们来这个问题？
对，他就是好像在敷衍，你要用手要一张张算，那我们两个这样不准啊，我说拿过来我来算啊，那他本来不愿意啊，我说你要让大家平息下来，因为那个票数已经算错。
你有没有看说，确实上面？
对，我就是这样一张一张算。
那陈水扁的你有没有算？
有，可是我现在又有一个问题，我们很笨，因为我们没有经验。他怎么这样，你知道？他拿一叠一叠过来100张，对不对？他不是放在旁边吗？我算完一叠，他就把那叠拿走。那我算完都拿走，我也不知道你后面到底还有多少票啊？能有意思吗？他并不是把全部的票都拿过来嘛，他只是先拿过一部分给你。那你算，一叠是100张，没错。
陈水扁里面的票，你有没有把它打开来看？有没有？你只是算张数而已。
有啊，就是算的时候看到啦，算的时候就看到他盖了，因为我是这样亲手算的好累，就从1张2张这样算。
用翻的，不是说用那种这样。
陈水扁的张数跟上面登记有张数都一样。
不是，对，我的意思是说，是没错，但是他都拿多少个过来，我不知道，你懂我意思吗？他只是他一叠一叠拿过来，我帮你们懂我意思，就他没办法全部放在桌上。
In a nutshell, what they basically said is that when they counted the ballots for each candidate, they just said, okay, this candidate has X number of ballots, like 100 or something. They didn't count them one by one. It was basically a total mess. When they count the ballots like this, they can produce any result they wish because they don't have to show you the ballots. This happened in Taipei City, where Ma Ying-jeou from the KMT was mayor. So this notion that you can't cheat where the KMT is in office is not true. The election staff are not all appointed by the local city government. Oftentimes the key people are sent by the Central Election Commission. If the head of the voting station is sent by the Central Election Commission, everyone else in the voting station has to listen to him or her. They're basically the boss. So there you have it. That's how Chen Shui-bian got elected in the year 2000. The election staff, from north to south, stole James Song's ballots and stuffed Chen Shui-bian and Lian Zhan's ballots to replace them. It was a very heavy and widespread operation centered mostly in central and southern Taiwan. So if we adjust the official results for election fraud, we have to add about 7 percentage points to James Song, remove around 4 percentage points from Chen Shui-bian, and remove around 3% for Lian Zhan. This is just a rough estimate, but it's clear that James Song was the actual winner of this election. So these are my rough estimates. James Song with around 5.6 million or 43.62%. Chen Shui-bian with 4.47 million or 34.7%. Lian Zhan with 2.57 million or 20%. Based on these estimates, James Song won by about 1.1 million. Therefore, the general interpretation that the blue camp split up their votes is probably not correct. There's enough evidence in central and southern Taiwan alone to suggest that James Song was the actual winner. So looking back at the opinion polls from TVBS Poll Center the last 3 days of the election, we can see that the strategy was to downplay James Song's support, put him in third place, and to exaggerate Lian Zhan's support, the KMT candidate, in order to mislead pan-blue voters into voting for Lian. Based on the analysis in all cities and counties, we can see that not enough people voted for Lian instead of Song for their plan to work. So therefore, election fraud was the actual plan. The fake opinion polls was just something to help out. Fake opinion polls are essentially a pretext to election fraud in Taiwan. So did James Song know about this? He certainly did. This information was presented to James Song after the 2000 election, but he refused to endorse this book. Instead, only his wife did. When I interviewed Dr. Ramon Myers at Hoover Institution in Stanford, He told me that James Song told him privately that his ballots had been stolen in central and southern Taiwan. He was very clear about what happened. However, to this day, James Song has not said any of this publicly. My interpretation is that he doesn't want to be attacked for being a sore loser because he already conceded the election. He knows as well as anyone that it's impossible to get justice in Taiwan's judicial system. Therefore, he played the long game and thought he could get into office by pairing up with Lian Zhan in 2004, but he got cheated again. It wasn't just the 319 incident, it was election fraud again. Therefore, his silence in 2000 did not pay off. In fact, it actually hurt him 4 years later.
不但做假民调，而且还放假消息，而且还去买票。所以最近他们说，那时候国民党花了将近上百亿，然后到处在买票。
所以那时候真的有，
啊、
所以那时候真的有在买票吗？
怎么没有？这有法律案子，到今天还可以去查、不然我会落选吗？
He's claiming here that he lost due to fake opinion polls and vote buying. However, vote buying probably had a negligible effect on the election. We can see that Lian and Chen Shui-bian's ballots were actually just stuffed, and his ballots were stolen. If there was vote buying, it wasn't enough to turn around the election for Chen Shui-bian. Now we can see that the opinion polls are being faked to put Ko Wen-je into third place and to exaggerate Hou Yu-yi of the KMT party in second place. This is all a pretext to election fraud on January 13th, 2024. Based on the body language of the DPP party, I would say that they're rather unworried about this campaign. It seems like they have everything under control. They've done this before. The Central Election Commission is a well-oiled machine. If they did it in 2020, they can certainly do it again in 2024. The amount of fraud won't be as big as it was last time, but it will be enough. Videos will be taken. Naturally, I'll post them. And Chairperson Li Jingyong of the Central Election Commission is probably going to have to send the Criminal Investigation Bureau after me again. Okay, Chairman Ke, you've been warned. A lot of people in Taiwan don't think election fraud is a real thing. However, I think it is. If you don't take this seriously, I promise you on January 13th, 2024, you will be cheated out of the presidency. And your party will be quickly forgotten, which is exactly what the DPP and KMT parties want. Right now, the entire media in Taiwan, blue and green, are united against the Ke ticket, even though he's allegedly in third place. Why would the media go after a third place candidate so hard like that if these opinion polls were real? You can see on the KMT side that Hou Yu-yi and Zhao Zhaokang didn't even show up for this. I don't think they're really that into it. I think that they're just playing their role. If you would like to buy me a coffee, please do so. This is the first of a series of videos that will be released before the election.